If everything is loud, then nothing is loud. If everything is wet, then nothing is wet. If everything is exciting, then nothing is exciting.
There's only so much sonic space, right? And so you can't go beyond the line, even though a lot of people would like you to believe you can.
The one thing that I really try to get across is the idea of creating dynamics with your arrangements. I was just reminded of this idea when I was listening to the new Tape Notes episode with Jack Antonoff, and he talked about this concept of how there's only so much sonic landscape we can make use of.
So I think so much about that field, and sometimes, or often, to achieve something, it's not the obvious route.
There exists a spectrum between absolute silence and pure white noise, and all the music that we love is in between that spectrum. That's also something that Andrew Huang talked about in his book, Make Your Own Rules. So I want to talk about this a little bit today.
In the sonic field, more, which is something we fight with in compression, often equals less, because if you hit the wall, and so it's kind of like placing these things in different spots to actually make something sound big. That is a huge thought when it comes to drums and low end specifically, because the louder you play the drum, especially if it's a live drum, often the more you back yourself into the corner with how loud it can sound on the record. That's why I like to play so quiet.
And it does make intuitive sense, right? Say you record a drum set really quiet, just like boom. Then when you're in the mix session, you can feel it out. You can push it way to the front of the mix, way to the back of the mix, but the energy level feels pretty middle of the road, meaning that you could probably push those drums way far up front into the mix or push them back. And in the context of the mix, it will probably work. So I wanted to make an example to illustrate this. Here I'm in Logic and I have 2 drum tracks here. So these are the exact same kits. The only difference is that the second one, the overhead mics have been turned down and the velocities have been turned down a little bit. And you'll see that these, while they are level matched, they're hitting at the exact same volume level, they have a much different energy feel. So what do we do with this information? Really, this just means that in the context of a mix, if the drums are loud, they're being played very loud, the energy level of them is loud, you're going to be backed into a bit of a corner when it comes to trying to fit a lot of other elements into the mix, trying to create a really dense mix, because this one element, these drums here in this case, are taking up a lot of that space. They have a lot of energy and they're going to demand more space in the mix. It's going to be harder to make them feel small. There are some tricks you could do to make them feel smaller and to kind of remove some of that room sound, but that's just how they were recorded and played, so that's what we would have to work with in a mix. Whereas on this hand, these drums are a little drier, so they have less of a tail, they have less of a smack to them, and this might mean that we would have more room to fit other elements into the mix and push those elements maybe a little bit louder than these drums. Really, I'm just trying to illustrate the idea of energy and volume in our mix and how we can only fit so many things in the forefront at one time. If you watch this video, you'll see that Jack has a lot of energy coming from other elements in the mix. Because the drums aren't taking up so much space, he has a lot more room to play louder acoustic guitar, play louder saxophone, beat up the electric bass with some really hard downstrokes, and ultimately create a really dense wall of sound. So if you're the one in charge of the music arrangement on a track you're working on, take note of these kinds of ways of working to create the dynamics in the track with the arrangement and the sound of the instruments themselves, rather than trying to fix it in the mix later. Now, on the flip side of this conversation, I want to talk about what if you already have all of these elements in place, and the only thing you can do is adjust the mix to create dynamics. The instruments are recorded and everyone's left, or you're just the mixing engineer of the track. What are some things you can do to create dynamics and control the perspective in the song? Let's take a look at some of that stuff. So in this example that Jack talks about in this podcast, he refers to like the sonic landscape that we have when we're working with our music, and how you can only get so loud with every element at one time, right? Everything has to exist in a space or it's just going to be a blasted out puddle of noise. So I wanted to give an example of something that I am doing. So I'm currently doing a 3-hour long live rock album. It's been a really interesting project and it's kind of different than some of the other stuff I put on this channel. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of show this to you guys. So if you look down throughout this session, I have so many different things going on. there's a lot of volume automation happening here. So what I'm constantly doing is I'm changing the perspective of the mix throughout each song, because when these guys played live, when they recorded this thing live, they were all playing at a pretty stable loud energy so that the live engineer can choose to mix things in and out at the time. So now that we have this in this session here, my job is to kind of help recreate that energy, create an evolving dynamic mix that doesn't feel like too much all at once. So we're doing a lot of things to help bring some elements in certain sections of the song, duck them out in others. For instance, one example that I could easily show you is the amount of automation I've done on these electric guitars, because the electric guitar is supposed to be a comping instrument during verses and choruses and stuff, but then it's supposed to come to the front for guitar solos. However, this guitarist is very dynamic, and I didn't want to smash the guitar all with compression, so I'm doing a lot of volume automation to help balance and just kind of gently caress the guitar solos throughout their time, because we don't want some notes to be piercing loud and then others to be inaudible. So here's an example I wanted to get across. So this is the electric guitar on this one track, and we'll watch how the guitar goes from being a comping instrument to more of a melodic kind of filler thing in this quiet section of the song. So listen to the bit of dynamic change that's going on here and how I'm coping with that with the volume automation I'm doing. So what's kind of going on here is that during this part of the song, you heard piano going on there, the drums were loud. So I didn't want the guitar to be too loud. I wanted it to be a bit in the background with all those other things going on, right? However, when we get into the breakdown section where the drums start to change up and the singer comes in, then I am bringing it up in certain sections while the guitarist is playing lower notes, because often lower notes translate to feeling quieter. Even if we're hitting the same volume targets, to our ears, lower notes on a guitar, any instrument, is going to feel a little bit lower. So often when somebody's playing those kind of notes, I will sometimes bring that up to compensate. So here over the course of this section, the guitar instrument goes from one level to 2 dB higher over the course of the different sections here. So let's take it back to the start of the song, and I'm going to show you the changes happening from the intro to, say, the first verse and when the drums come in the song. So you'll see on this acoustic guitar, the waveform is sitting pretty quiet, and then it gets louder. So I'm compensating for that by bringing the guitar up in the intro when it's really soft, and then slowly bringing it down when other instruments are coming into the mix. So let's take a listen to that real quick. So you hear when those other instruments are starting to come in, I don't have the acoustic guitar still at the front and center of the mix because it's going on to take more of that comping kind of role in the mix. Here's one other small area where I'm just adjusting the level of a piano when we come from the verse to the chorus. So vocals are coming in, there's another guitar lick coming in as well, and I'm just compensating by just bringing down the piano just by 3 dB. And it doesn't even really feel like that because there's all this other energy that's starting to happen in the mix. That 3 dB on the piano, that doesn't feel like a big change. Here's another example with the piano where we're going from a solo section with a harmonica, then back down into a verse section. Listen to a little bit of this dynamic change that is going on. So we have a difference of 6 dB on the piano over the course of this section. Again, my job here is to help create the dynamics of the track because you can see that the piano is playing at a constant volume throughout most of this piece here. Throughout most of these examples, they're playing at a constant volume. So I'm trying to help shift and create that dynamics where it isn't inherent to the recordings themselves. And here's another example where in one part of the song, we've got piano going on and we've got an organ going on. Then another part of the song, we have a church organ and then still like the Leslie type of organ. So that's a situation, well, we have two pretty similar instruments. We kind of have to make a decision on which one deserves the center of attention. So here in this section, it works for them both being together, but when we get later into the track, I don't think it really works with both of them sitting at a kind of equal level. So I have the Hammond type organ turned down and I have this church type organ turned way up. Sometimes we just need to make those kinds of decisions in the mixing process. We need to establish, okay, this instrument, it can be here, but it is not the center of attention. It needs to get ducked into the back of the mix. Again, we only have 2 ears. There's only so much room, especially when we're competing for mixes to be sitting at these high loudness levels where everything's squashed together. We only have so much room. So we have to be really choosy on the attention that each instrument is getting. And also, it's important to remember that our brains, we can only perceive so many different things going on in parallel at one time. So this kind of way of thinking actually helps you out a little bit when you're trying to create an interesting mix, is that our brains can only hold on to so much information at one time. So therefore, it's helpful, I think, if you make these changes, make these decisions over the course of your production, your arrangement, your mix, to keep the listener engaged, bring things in, bring things out, change stuff every 4 bars, every 8 bars. Create something interesting by bringing things in and out, and by making your volume automation, your fader mix, just as important as the other mixing things that you're doing, such as EQ and compression. I feel like a lot of us, because we have all these advanced tools, we don't think to step back and just make it simple and create the emotion of the song with the volume changes that we're making. I think it's important for us to step back sometimes and not think about any of those advanced mix tricks such as mid-side EQ, parallel compression, multi-band compression. All those kinds of things are great. They have their place. But I think what is so much more important and helps you out in a lot of situations is just simple perspective, bringing things in when they need to be there, taking them out or ducking them away when they don't need to be there. You could see my example of me doing this on an EDM track right over here. If you'd like a free feedback video on your song, hit me up in the link down below. And I'd also love to hear from you if you need any music production on your tracks. Check me out in the links down below.